When most people think about human trafficking, they think about forced prostitution. For good reason. There are 4.2 million women and girls in forced prostitution around the world. Now, my first exposure to this was about 30 years ago. I was living and working in Nepal. I was a public health officer and I had the HIV/AIDS portfolio. And we were finding girls that were 12, 13 years old who were HIV positive. Now, if you know anything about Nepal, you know it's a very conservative culture. We should not have found that disease among that age group. So we went to go and interview the women and the girls. And what we pretty much heard was the same story over and over again. It went something like this. A human trafficker, a guy around 20 years old, would go into a village. He'd flash a bunch of money around. He'd say he's looking for a wife. He didn't want an urban wife. He wanted a rural wife, a village wife. He'd find a girl, 12, 13 years old, befriend her, and then go to the family and say, I'd like to marry your daughter. They're thinking, wow, he's rich, he's handsome, he's going to take care of our daughter, he's going to take care of us. A couple of days later, they actually have a wedding ceremony. The entire community is there. After that, he goes to the family and says, I'm going to take your daughter to Kathmandu, but don't worry, I'll be back in about 3 months. But that isn't what's going to happen. Instead of taking her to Kathmandu, he takes her to Mumbai, India, to the red light district where the prostitution takes place. He puts her in a room and he says, honey, stay here. I'll be back in a few minutes. As the girl was coming in, she saw these girls and men milling around. The girls were dressed funny. She says, no, 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 no. Don't leave me here. I'm scared. He says, it's okay. I'll be back in a few minutes. He then goes to the madam to get the $500 for having sold her to the brothel. He has the gold from the wedding, and he hands the wedding pictures over. He then goes back to Nepal to do this again and again, maybe 40, 50 times in a year. The madam then goes into the room where the girl is and says, guess what? Your husband just sold you to me, and you're going to be with 20 guys a day, every day, because I say so. You can imagine her shock. No, 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 my husband loves me. No, that's what happened. When she comes to internalize what's going on, many of the girls say, I will kill myself before I do those shameful things. The madam then brings out the photograph of the family and says, is this your mom, your dad, your brother? If you hurt yourself, we'll hurt them. So she's trapped in this situation. In order to make her into a prostitute, it's quite simple. You bring in a couple of professional rapists, and over a 2-day period of time, they take this 12-year-old girl and rape her over and over and over, maybe 20, 30 times in a 48-hour period. After that, she is so broken that she just lays back and accepts whatever happens to her. After that, she goes out on the line, which means she'll be with 20 guys a day, every day, until after about 2 years, she gets what's called black eye, where she's so depleted physically, emotionally, and spiritually that nobody wants her. So they throw her out onto the street. If she's lucky, she makes it back to Nepal. Many of them languish in India and just die of tuberculosis or AIDS or something else. So I was hearing this story over and over again, but I didn't understand the evil of it until I actually went to those brothels. I was invited by the Indian government to do public health checks. I had a police officer with me. I would go from brothel to brothel. I went into one of the brothels and there was an 11-year-old trafficking victim. This girl saw me, saw an opportunity, and literally ran up and wrapped herself around me and said, save me, save me. They're doing terrible things to me. I looked down at this child who was hysterically crying, wearing a dress 20 sizes too big because she was a child in an adult's world. I turned to the police officer and said, we need to get this girl out of here. He said, we can't do that. So what are you talking about? You're a cop. He says, if we try to get her out of here, we'll both get killed. To make a long story short, we left. We came back with more cops, but of course the girl was gone. Now I tell this story because I wasn't one of those 15-year-olds that said, when I grow up, I want to become an activist. In fact, I did everything I could not to become an activist. I wanted to live a good life, move up in the US government system, make a bunch of money. But every once in a while, life conspires against us. We have a test. My big test was to get that girl out, and I failed miserably. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, and eventually did what a lot of activists do. Once I had seen this, I surrendered to the fact that now that I know about this, I can't turn my back on it, and became an activist. And 30 years later, here I am talking to you in this video.